this book from the shelf and went home and read it cover to cover in the next few days, and fell in love with the cinematic language that he used to describe living through the 60s in the United States. And I was a graduate student in the city at that time and teaching undergraduates and having a lot of conversations with 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds about what was happening in the world. And speaking explicitly about genocide in Palestine. And I think reading David's words was me like searching initially for a way to locate our own rage and grief and that of another generation. And I loved the essay. And at first, my like graduate work is in sort of war media and ethnographic cinema, and I was really just sort of continued to read his essays for pleasure and because, again, I think that year for me was a moment where my politics really sharpened around these constellation of issues, and started to learn more and more about how Vietnam and resistance to sort of American war in Vietnam has been intertwined in the global imaginary with that of the Palestinian liberation movement across multiple generations. And I, at the time, had been working on a project that was using a lot of footage from the Department of Defense. And that's always sort of stunning to me how these war crimes are captured on camera, and really expensive cameras owned by the State Department and the Department of Defense. And there was this sort of like real natural or like a very organic moment in a collaboration with a friend where I asked her to read an excerpt from this essay, and I was cutting some material, some footage from the DoD into it, and it grew into a film. So it has I mean, every project has an interesting gestation period. This one happened over a year, but I think so much of it was about trying to interrogate and understand like my relationship to solidarity intergenerationally, and this was the product of that. Yeah.
I think I can go and share a little bit about mine, because I honestly made that film to survive. I was in such a deep state of grief. I had just moved to the United States. I'm an international student, and I was at the epicenter of, um, you know, an elitist university that calls itself progressive, but at the same time profits as much as many other universities within the United States from development of warfare. And I think for me, as an outsider to this country, that is shocking to see how complicit academia is in maintaining these systems of oppression. But at the same time, the film was not about that. It was more about how, I don't know if you have heard of The Right to a Dignified Image by a Syrian collective whose name I forgot in this moment, but Abu Nadara. It's a Syrian collective that talks about the right of a dignified image. And as I was witnessing all of the videos that were coming out in October 2023, and understanding the need to perhaps share them in social media, because that's what Palestinians were asking us to amplify the reality. I also wanted to attempt making a film in which we could grieve without necessarily exploiting graphically those images. And at the same time, because the last stage of colonialism is erasure, I wanted to archive genocidal discourse, particularly in contrast to those videos.
Okay. So Stitch the Ruin, very, very different process. I shot it on 16mm film, and basically the first roll was just me playing in the studio in 2016. I didn't really think of it, okay, I'm gonna make a film about these garments. So I was born in Zagreb, but I live in New York for the last 20 years. So every time I would come home, I would bring a piece because my grandma, my mom, we all love going together to this flea market, which is a legendary flea market located in Zagreb. And when we would get a piece of clothing, sometimes dress, coat, it can be anything. And then, I'm gathering this almost in a way spontaneously in New York. And more, as I'm looking at this, I understand the quality and I'm starting to notice the tags. So here we go. Of course, in the same time, I did many performances, other works of art that comment on complete destruction of the industry in Croatia. We can even go wider on the territory of ex-Yugoslavia. So we had hundreds of textile factories that don't exist anymore. So as years go by, here I am recording a little more, shooting film, and I'm trying to do this extreme close-up so we can really see all the little details, like in these fabrics and everything. And then the next layer, what happens is I'm starting to understand as I'm digging more and more that all of these garments were produced here. None of these factories exist anymore, and most of them are named. They carry names of very famous women, female anti-fascist fighters. So in Second World War, Yugoslavia had a really big army. Female army, actually. And in a way, they were also trying later on to not just naming the factories based on these famous, amazing women, but also they were trying to get women to work in these factories. So there is something called the industrial structure of feeling, where people were actually genuinely happy. They had their families. So there was a lot of sadness when the collapse happened. Most of them closed in the beginning of 90s during Balkan Wars, but some closed later. And I talked with many of these women. A lot of them were part of my family. So it was devastating. But then I created this thing and I thought that it's a little bit too pretty because I didn't expect that. It's just like I was trying to find a way to document these objects. So that's why you have this ending where I'm doing like a voice spoken word moment where I'm just naming those that I remember that collapsed. That's it. Yeah.
My project is very personal, I would say, and it's like very much tied to a specific moment when the media collection was gathered. I didn't really do any like projects with audio or video before, and for me, like turning to collecting media was like kind of a step I had to make, like when my usual tools couldn't really work. I started collecting that media like the day after like the last more or less large protest failed in St. Petersburg in general. Like it was like a very failed attempt at mass protest because you just go out there and you see that there's more police than the protesters, and it's just like was absolutely futile. And before that I did research, and it also like was completely like inadequate to be like doing research at the moment of like such crisis. So, and it also I needed to make a decision on whether I'd be leaving or I'd be staying, as many people at that moment. And to me it's kind of like that this film like captures like this sort of like a parting of a community, a political community that is like right now divided by the migration choices or the lack of choice. So on the one hand, it was like me trying to like reckon with what's going on, trying to take something with me as I would go, but at the same time, I'm more experienced in interviewing, and I felt that like at that moment, like people really like spoke really differently than I would hear them speak before, because normally like if you interview someone, you like need to like lead the discussion a little bit or like moderate it. And like at that moment, it felt that people had so much to say and you didn't need to prompt them. So like, all I would do just like switch on the mic and they would just go for like half an hour uninterrupted. And I felt that like it was pretty unique moment before we have learned to talk about it, before like some kind of like a narrative developed, like the war routinized. And so I know that people do not speak like this anymore. Like the narrative has changed. Like for even people with anti-war stances in Russia right now, like talking like openly about the war is like a taboo, or like there's kind of all the euphemisms are developed. For example, like not the war but the events. Yeah, so I wanted to sort of like capture that way of speaking. Yeah, and I edited it already as a migrant. And yeah, I think it was also like helping me to process that. It was my first experience with film editing, and so kind of like I don't really have like a developed like language of film editing, and I was like trying different things. Yeah, and thank you for giving this film a life and legitimizing it by accepting it to the film festival.
These are all great answers. And so I've had a little moment to think about, Louisa, going back to your question about kind of urgency and why this film now. And a year before this, I'd made another film, and I'm very interested in the space between speculative fiction and nonfiction, and thinking about taking these more absurd or fantastic narrative routes just to kind of think about where we are right now. And I'd made a film about Earth's last winter and videographers that were hired or contracted to film this event to be turned into some content for a streaming channel. And as I was finishing that film, I realized I was thinking about kind of this, ecological collapse, but it was so human centric. And I was thinking, can I fit a non-human perspective into this film? And then I realized I just need to make a film from a non-human perspective, thinking about kind of these struggles that we're having in this time of like high capitalism and high development. And it was made. I probably started it while I was still making The Lost Season, and it had this very kind of Guy Debord Dury feel to it. So I spent a lot of time in airports, and when you're spending a lot of time in places, you really get to think about the power structures around there and who gets to pass and who gets, thinking about the security and just thinking about kind of all these other politics that happen in the airport. I had long been fascinated by the lone bird you see in the airport. And so I started reading up on them, and, the airport in Denver is like on some major migration paths, and the planes are where they like come down and they take a break and they look for some food. And so, of course, during this time, there's no way you can't think about these questions of displacement, of colonization, of annexing space. And so a lot of those other conversations moved into this film. And at the same time, there are these other kind of serendipitous circumstances, orcas attacking yachts, and it was this moment of thinking about like, well, yes, what if there was this collective rebellion of the non-human world on kind of the indulgence and like wounds of late capitalism. So that's how it came about.
Thank you, everyone, for your responses. Watching your films, for me, there was this through line idea of the body as a site of resistance. And this is more obvious, of course, in Pamela's film, as I witness, as you have the names of people who were killed in the past few years in Palestine, on the body, on the skin, and you write very nicely at the end, very evocatively, that there's not enough skin for how many names should be there. And so with your film, it's obvious, but I also see this idea of body as resistance in all the other films. So Katya, in your film, is the absent or the hidden body that emerges through the voices that we hear or through the signs, the anti-war signs on the walls, the messages that we see. Or Kelly is the non-human body that organizes in your speculative narrative, organizes and calls to action, right? So the migratory birds whose path is disrupted by the air traffic, but they also can disrupt. So there is this empowering of the non-humans. In Angelica's film, I also thought of the women workers, right? We see the product of their labor. We see the textures of those clothes, but we can imagine those hands behind doing the work, and the women who were vulnerable after the dismantling of the garment industry in ex-Yugoslavia. So, and I'm also thinking of the partisans you are talking about, and how you evoke these two groups in the same film so beautifully, and in such a simple way, but also very, very powerful. And Christina, of course, the bodies in your film are captured on cameras. They are the resistors that became the archive, and they are there to prove and to be evidence to their actions, and I like how, watching your film, I also thought of the quote from Faulkner that the past is not dead, is not even past. Like, your film resonates so much. It felt so contemporary, seeing the way you edited and the way you referenced the current moment events. So I would like us to talk a little bit, of course, if this is interesting to you as a topic, about the body as a site of resistance, about these presences and absences in your films. And yeah, whoever would like to start, maybe Pamela, you can start, as it's the obvious one, but yeah.
I will be brief, but I wanted to share that part of creating that space, it was because we were really thinking about ritual and performance and what the body remembers in the long term and in the short term. And that's why we feel, or like if you could see the difference between when we're writing with henna, which is a long historical process of fragmenting and amputating the body, and the short term, which is the urgent current genocide. So I think I wanted to share that I think part of thinking of that body is that it was specifically made in collaboration with students that early in October were part of a sitting at the university where I was, that were the crucial bodies to just keep remembering, keep not only raise awareness, but like keep reminding each other that what is happening is not normal, and that cognitive dissonance is what brought us together.
I'll go out the call. For me, it was really important that you don't know who the body is until halfway through. And so halfway through, it's, there's this address of the narrator, who I just want to say thank you also to Dan Schneidkraut, because the narrator for this film was the same actress who narrated another film that was in Mimesis. So this was the narrator of The Truth About Hastings. And so I contacted Dan to, because I loved the voiceover in that film. And so I wanted to bring that voice into this film. And it was really important to me that you didn't know who was actually speaking, and until halfway through, to the you changes to we, and our flocks start to darken the sky. And I think during the process of making this, of course, you're just like reading up on any bird thing that comes around, and it was great because everyone was sending me articles about bird strikes and books about birds. So it's just like a lot of time just to be in this world of birds. But there's a great there's like night tracking, because birds migrate at night, and you can just like follow like where birds are migrating. And then during high peak season, the skies are full of birds at night. You have no idea. And I think I was just really just like smitten with just like how many birds are out there, and that there are 50 billion birds, but they're also in great threat right now in terms of kind of like forests burning and just like where their migration patterns go and where they're endangered. So I was really thinking about this as like kind of this hopeful story about like we can all come together and we can totally change like something that seems so set in place, right? Like airports, they're so big, they take up so much space, they consume, they produce so much like waste. And yet I was thinking about this story as one that we could hopefully draw inspiration from, and having all of our bodies come together when we need to.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Just, yeah, because as soon as Louisa said that, I thought about the voice in your project who says something like they bring their bodies to the demonstration, but they won't protest.
Yeah. I was like, in response to your question, I'm thinking how like my project like probably speaks a lot about a certain collective experience where while there is no my voice in that film, but like I shape the perception of that experience like through film editing, through the choices of visual. Like only the last line in the film is like my line, but at the same time, as I was like working on it, gradually I was showing some pieces of it to the people who were staying either in Russia or were in exile, and like how a lot of them said that like yeah, like it's very much like viscerally, like really explains like how a lot of people like felt. That was like a shared experience, and also like it talks a lot about collective memory. It's like what kind of where do people like go and whatever available it is in our like cultural memory to try to explain what's going on. And yeah, and so like I feel that that moment was like shared, like of this like kind of major rupture was shared by many people, but then at the same time, like as a migrant, I like, and to me it's like one of the scariest thing about migration is that you kind of like your homeland becomes just frozen in that moment, while it's actually like things go on, people like learn what the red lines are, they like continue acting. But like for me it's sort of was a way to like perpetuate like that moment when I left, and in a way like I am not present there anymore, and I'm not part of the collective of people who are staying in Russia, and I cannot anymore as a migrant really like speak in their behalf. So it's like very much like an artifact of my migration. And yeah, I also remembered how there was a Zoom birthday celebration of one person who also left at the time, and it was like already 3 years after. And when the person was asked about his age, he said his age when he left. And so yeah, so I don't know. I think that there is some things that are when they're like experienced collectively, they just stay with us.
I love how you said collective experience, because for me it was very challenging and hard to do something this abstract, because it's not usually how my work looks like. It's just that a part of the research was because I did another project previously. So I had a lot of interviews with women who worked in textile factories. There were protests in Zagreb happening for many, many months and years. But how do you translate something that's just a feeling, in the same time feeling of love, but also feeling of loss, and then not really use people, not having any kind of interviews? So yes, we do end up with like a finger just trying to show like direction of the stitch, or maybe point towards the tag. And then if we talk about the bodies, yes, later on I do show there is like this film object where we can see models from the 60s, 70s, just like printed on the paper. But this was a big challenge for me, not to use any kind of voiceover, really, because that's not a voiceover, what we have at the end. That's literally me improvising like for a second. That was recorded and that was it. So yes, me as an artist, how can I talk about something like that without being too didactic or too literal? Because usually I'm very didactic. Yeah. So I stayed kind of abstract, but I think I communicated that emotion. Hopefully.
All of your responses are so beautiful. I've been taking notes and I'll try to connect them. Yeah, I think the body as a site of resistance is a question I think about a lot and have been thinking about a lot in the last few years. I think for me, protest takes many different forms, and depending on where you're what position you're coming from, those forms manifest differently, right? There are like different risk thresholds that we all think through when we are embarking or like joining protest alongside others. But I feel like the most material and corporal expression of that is the protester in the street, in a group, in a collective. And a lot of the footage I was watching from 1968 does have a very contemporary feel. Like you say, Louisa, it feels like exactly what I'm experiencing now and exactly what I have been experiencing for the last 2 years. And I think these images have a very meaningful place in the American psyche. One that should alert us to urgency regardless of the year, right? Because these things are very generational. But I think one way to seek or to maybe to resist the ways that these images and the way they're distributed do try to like pacify and calcify as much as they do activate us, is to be together, right? Is to experience resistance collectively. I think like in talking to you now, I still feel this incredible struggle to like metabolize the world. I don't know how anyone is really metabolizing the world right now without feeling overwhelmed by the ways others' hearts have atrophied. And one place I think like the people I was spending a lot of intense time with in the last few years are those who are like alive to the world outside of them and inside of them, and they're alive to our sort of common humanity, and they don't feel shame to express that kind of rage or love or righteousness or indignation in public, and to do that in a group is very, very powerful. And capturing those images is important. And so, you know, this is a film that mobilizes archival to speak across time. But like, I think that, again, Pamela, to your point, is like one way to kind of fight the disorientation of this is to archive it ourselves, and to resist the ways that others use those images to pacify and to calcify, and instead find them to be mobilizing and softening as much as they are sort of fighting this experience. We have to fight this experience to like be isolated by these types of images, or alienated by these types of images, because we shouldn't experience that disorientation of the world alone. So bodies together as a site of resistance feels important in this moment. Yeah.
I would like maybe to open it to the audience. I don't know if there are questions in there.
Yeah.
Yes. I have a really quick one, if that's okay. And because my question has already been answered, actually, but in this conversation. But nonetheless, I wanted to thank all of you for the participation. The ideas that were resonating throughout the screening had everything to do with how the work that we do not only bleeds into our lives, but also sweats into our lives. So like this notion of embodied experience is what I'm trying to get at. How like this notion that has already been answered. So like I'm not going to be redundant. but nonetheless, I wanted to thank everybody for the conversation, and I also wanted to mention, I wanted to thank the one person who is in the audience, Emmett Casey, for the color work that he did for the call, and really beautiful work as well. So, like, just to highlight the artisanship that is happening in situ as we speak. But yes, we can open the conversation.
If anyone needs an exquisite colorist, Emmett is the best.
Do you have business cards with you, Emmett? Go ahead,
Okay.
Camilla.
Thank you, everybody. That's such a beautiful program. And hi, Louisa. Really nice seeing you. I have a series of, can I have 2 questions for 2 different artists? Thank you. So Kelly, I've seen your film before. You kindly showed it or let us show it at the climate change workshops I did in Seattle a while ago. And I was thinking about your film as I watched it on the big screen right now as a form of kind of feminist counter-apocalypse. Because so many narratives around climate change are this kind of doom, middle-class white man's narratives. Let's just sit back and watch how the world is being destroyed. And I think what I was also thinking about watching it now, that it's kind of, it reminded me of Bell Hooks' words that artist's role is not just to show things as they are, but to try and imagine the world that could be. And I think what better not to do it than through film. And I wondered if you had any response to that.
It's so funny. I've been, I'm a professor at the university here, and I've just been, I find I've been collaborating a lot with women. So it's a very interesting that, like, there's been a lot of these times where there's just like a lot of work to be done. And I've just found myself in a lot of collaborative situations with women. But I think collaboration is something that I think about a lot with work, and I love the Donna Haraway book, Staying with the Trouble. And she says in these troubled times, right, we can't say it's too late, or we can't say there'll be some technological fix. She says that we actually have to radically change our thinking and start thinking about these larger scopes of collaboration, and like not just collaborating with the human world. I need to be thinking about, how can I collaborate with the dirt or the bacteria in the dirt, and like thinking about like kind of these larger systems where we all have to work together. And, in the film, I was like, I think that the birds will allow the airline industry to continue to exist, but really it has to be on their terms. And so I was just thinking about ways like, yes, there's one model of like, we're doomed, or like, everything has to go, which in many cases that might be true. But here is like, what's a way that we can work with like the structures that are here and actually make a better solution? But I like it as like a that's something I'm going to take with me.
Actually, it's not my phrase. It's Joanna Zelinska's phrase. It's a book that's called Feminist Counter-Apocalypse. Yeah.
Okay.
But okay, I can give you more details after. Yeah, but Jelika, I also wanted to ask you, this might be very, very far-fetched, but I don't know if anybody had this experience of the film, but I found it very erotic, the way you filmed it.
Definitely.
And what I was wondering about, there's this link in former Yugoslav films, as well as Czech films, for example. I'm thinking Vera Hitilova or Dušan Makavejev, link between eroticism and revolutionary politics. I thought that was really striking in your film, and if it's too far-fetched, then totally disregard, but I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, that's a really good. Okay, Vera Chitilova, Daisies is a film that I saw when I was 15 years old. I had an anarchist punk band called the Shizadviklers, and we watched it together, and it changed our lives. Dušan Makavejev came later. So I was not thinking of these two when I was making that. But yes, I was, I think, a little bit blocked for a few years after I saw my first role. It did look a little too pretty, and then some things looked a little too sexy. So I think I was trying to find my way around this. Again, it was not really me, but then it is also me. I think maybe it's okay that sometimes some things just stay subconscious.
Absolutely. That's part of me. I'm thinking, that there's just a certain sensibility that you might have, obviously, as a filmmaker from that part of the world.
If it changed my life when I was 15, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Because we were so impressed.
Yeah, I just want to add that
Tell me.
selfishly, I wish your film was part of my program on Saturday. but because I think they work together so well. But anyway, this is such a great program. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's one other time for one more. Ray.
Yes. Thank you so much, Louisa, and also hello. This is Ray. It's nice to actually see you even on screen. And I just want to say how impressed I am with this particular combination of films and just the differences between them. But also, I'm really struck, Pamela, by the directness of the title of your film, Witness. You know, and I'm wondering if because so many or each of your films witnesses something going on these days, but with few exceptions, there's no like direct footage of what we're talking about within the film. So, so I'm just wondering, you know, just this whole idea of positioning yourself as a witness. First of all, how do you choose the subject that you're going to talk about witnessing? Since it was mentioned, Christina mentioned just the impossibility of metabolizing everything that we're witnessing at this moment. So, and staying alive and staying conscious. So, and films are such that we have to witness, and then there's a timeline as we're witnessing that making the film takes. So, so I'm just wondering, this is very abstract, but, and then of course, Kelly, your amazing angle of coming at witnessing abstractly through speculative nonfiction, you know, and speaking, witnessing from a non-human point of view, which is brilliant. And Katya, I feel very humble witnessing, which is very direct, but also stepping back, taking a step back and saying, I'm not there, you know? So anyway, just these are the, and also Christina, your decision to witness intergenerationally from something that you yourself weren't living through, you know? So, but as you say, are living through something that's repeat and echo. So, long story short, that's very abstract, but I'm wondering if people could speak about yourselves as witnesses, how you chose to witness what you did witness, and how you chose to directly speak about your positionality as a witness.
Thank you for your questions. I can start. I'm sorry. I know someone. Do you want to go first? And they.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for your question. It has like many parts, and I think my witnessing of the current moment today was very much influenced by the fact that I did visit Palestine before, and I think once you see with your own eyes and you experience viscerally what does being occupied feel psychologically, that changes your life forever. And I must say that when I started witnessing from afar in early October 2023, I was not conscious of what would be the long-term consequences that witnessing would have on my body, that I feel like now, 2 years in, Susan Sontag talks about like how the shock value of an image doesn't actually shock us anymore. And then we also have to take care of how much exposure we get because we actually become desensitized. And yet understanding that for me, witnessing is a responsibility. So it's not about the how much, but understanding what are the different ways in which you can witness to continue, being the person that knows the truth, being a carrier of truth when there's still so much gaslighting about what is factual and what is not. And so I think that was like one question about your witnessing. And then the second one is like listening and understanding what your body is actually feeling is another form of knowledge that we always kind of downplayed over this hyper rationalization of things. So Kahir, actually the title is As I Witness Kahir, and Kahir is a an Arabic word term that does not have a direct translation, coined to express this feeling of rage that is so sedimented into your body of decades and decades of oppression that it becomes something else. So it's not only the immediate rage that you feel in a moment of shock or of anger. It's something that is very deep rooted in you. And it is like, imagine if you put it on a fire, you let it cook for centuries, and you cannot then expect that people are not gonna at some point become so fed that, psychologically you don't find any other way out. So yeah, I just wanted to say those two things. Thank you.
Katya, you want to close us out?
Sure. So in my case, I guess like what I needed to depict is was like a collapse of the public realm, of silencing, of alienation, of the disintegration of social worlds. And also a war that is not, how to say it, the actual warfare is not there, it's in Ukraine. And how this assault is not on my city, but on my identity, on the memory. And so, yeah, I guess the kind of the visual choices were because these were the subjects that I needed to depict.
Okay, I think we are out of time, but thank you for this, everyone. Louisa?
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa.
For your films.
Thank you.
Thank you.